Hello, it's Octodraws, and welcome to your first lesson of Ancient Greek. For most English speakers, you probably don't know the Ancient Greek alphabet, so let's go through all the letters, their sounds, and their quirks so that we can go further into the language. Sadly, this is just one of those things you have to memorize, and since memorizing these letters is the most important takeaway from the video, I recommend pausing, writing them out, and getting a good feel for each of them. But make sure you stay until the end because I have a special surprise to help you memorize the alphabet. And just as a brief disclaimer before we begin, I'll be using the textbook An Introduction to Greek by Crosby and Schaeffer because it's open source. However, I do make a few slight changes to help make it a bit more accessible to a contemporary audience because, this textbook is pretty old. So if you want to follow along with the book, check the link in the description for a free download from the Internet Archive. And with that being said, it's time for your Ancient Greek fun fact of the day. Did you know that the word alphabet comes from the first two letters of the Greek alphabet, alpha and beta? It's kind of like how in English we say our ABCs. It was adopted by the Romans from their Greek neighbors in Cumae, which is west of Naples, and handed on with only slight modifications to general European use. It was first seen in English in the early 16th century, coming directly from late Latin alphabetum, and if you didn't know, now you do. And that brings us to our first letter, alpha. It's a vowel, it makes the ah sound, it transliterates to a, and it can be seen in words like drama in ancient Greek, which is the same word in English. The second letter in the ancient Greek alphabet is beta. It makes the b sound, and it transliterates to a b. It can be seen in words such as biblion, meaning a book. The third letter is gamma. It makes the g sound, and it transliterates to a g. But when there's two next to each other, it makes the sound, and it transliterates to an ng. And you can see this in the word like ganglion, or ganglion in English. And yes, it means assist. I know, gross, sorry. It's just a word that has both sounds. The selection for this isn't great. Just remember that one gamma is the g sound and two gammas is the g sound. The next letter is delta. It makes the d sound just like a d, and it transliterates to a d as well. You can see this in words like deca, meaning 10. And in English, you can see that with like decagon, a shape that has 10 sides. The next letter is epsilon. It's a vowel and it makes the s sound. Make sure that it is the S sound because a lot of people pronounce it like A, but try to avoid that as best as you can because it's eh. It transliterates to an E. One example of this in ancient Greek is the word epos, which means a word or epic, like the literary genre. The next letter, zeta, is one of my favorites. It's a consonant and it makes the Z sound and it transliterates to a Z as well. One example is zone, which means a belt, which is what Travis Scott wears. The next letter is eta. It's a vowel, and it makes the A sound. It transliterates to an E, and one example of this is ede, meaning already, immediately, or now. Theta is a consonant. It makes the T sound. It's like a T with extra air because it's aspirated. In other words, spit on that thing. A lot of people do pronounce it like th, but that's not really how the Attic dialect would have pronounced it, so I'm not going to be pronouncing it that way. It does transliterate to a TH, but that's not really how it was pronounced in the Attic dialect. One example of theta is teos, meaning a god. The next letter is the smallest letter in the ancient Greek alphabet, and it's iota. It's a vowel. It makes the E sound, such as in the word idiotes, or idiot in English, meaning a private individual or someone who keeps to themselves, separated from social life, like me. It usually transliterates to an I, and it can also act like a Y, making the Y sound, such as in Iason or Jason, who's a character from the Argonautica, which is another fun adventure epic. Shout out Apollonius of Rhodes, and it isn't as long as the Odyssey, so if you're interested in reading it, you really should because this poem deserves a lot more love than it gets in my opinion. So despite being the smallest letter, this actually got a lot of talking time. The next letter is kappa. It makes the k sound, and it transliterates to a K as well. You can see this in words like krisis, meaning a decision or a judgment, and this is where we get the word for crisis. The next letter is lambda. It makes the L sound like an L in English, and it transliterates to an L as well. This letter is really cool because it has a silent B in it. You can see lambda in a word like logos, which means a word, account, story, judgment, or reasoning. You can see a really bad translation of this in the Gospel of John. En arche ein ha logos. In the beginning was reason or logic, not the word. When it was translated into Latin, it was translated to verbum instead of ratio. So that's why you never translate stuff into Latin before you translate it into English. Moo is just like what a cow says, and it's equivalent to the letter M. It makes a sound, and it transliterates to an M as well. You can see this in words like metron, meaning a meter. The next ancient Greek letter is nu. It makes a sound, and it transliterates to an N. You can see it in words like onti, meaning opposite or instead of. Next, we have Xi. It's a consonant. It makes the KS sound like an X in English, so it's only natural that it transliterates to an X as well. One example is axioma, meaning in honor or decree, and it's where we get the English word for axiom. The next letter is omicron, or little o. It makes the ah sound. Make sure you're not saying the O sound. It transliterates to an O as well. One example of omicron is apa, meaning away from. The next letter is P. Yeah, just like the English P, despite what the frat brothers would say. It makes the P sound and it transliterates to P. It can be seen in words like poietes, meaning a poet. The next letter is Rho. It makes the R sound like an R, and it transliterates to an RH, or sometimes just an R. For all my monkey fans out there, this is why Rhesus monkey has an H in it. It's named after Rhesus of Thrace, and he's a character from the Iliad. The next letter is Sigma. It makes the S sound and it transliterates to an S. You can see this in words like sporos, meaning a seed, and it's where we get the word for spore. It's also the greatest type of man to ever exist. The next letter is tau. It makes the T sound like T, and it transliterates to a T. You can see this in words like tone, meaning a tone. Now we have upsilon. It makes the U sound like a French U. It transliterates to either a Y or a U depending on the context. For example, you have Kuros, the emperor of the Persians, which later turns into Cyrus. The next letter is phi. It's a consonant, and it's just like P, but you put more air into it like it's aspirated, just like tau and theta. So spit on that thing. It transliterates to PH, and it's where we get the word pilipos, meaning horse lover, or in English, Philip. One-Eyed Philip's a pretty important guy, so you should look out for him when you see him. The next letter is key, like what you put into a lock, and it's a consonant. It makes the K sound, so it's the aspirated kappa, and it transliterates to CH. You can see this in words like character, where the key is translated to CH, but the kappa is just a C. The next letter is psi. It makes the ps sound, and it transliterates to a PS. You can see this in words like psyche, meaning soul, and where we get the words like psychic or psyche. The last letter is omega. It's a vowel, and the Christians love to point out that Jesus is both the alpha and the omega, meaning the beginning and the end. It makes the O sound, and it transliterates to an O as well. One example of this is okeanos, meaning ocean in English. Thank goodness we're finally done with that. But wait, there's more. The ancient Greek language also has this thing called diphthongs. What are they? Are they an insult to your brother? Are they just really weird sounding words? Are they a piece of clothing? Well, they're actually when two vowels come together into one syllable to make one sound. The second letter in a diphthong is always, drumroll please, iota or upsilon. So now let's go through some examples of each of the different diphthongs. Alpha iota makes the I sound like an isle. One example of this is phenomenon or phenomenon in English. It transliterates to AI or AE or sometimes just E. Next, we have epsilon iota, which makes the A sound like an 8. One example of this in Greek is eclaipsis or eclipse in English. It transliterates to E, I, or both E and I. Then we have omicron iota, which makes the oi sound like in toil. In Greek, when they shout and they're upset, they say oi moi, and it's kind of like in English when we say oh my. It transliterates to oi, oe, I, or just E. Next, we have upsilon iota, which makes the we sound, and it does not really appear transliterated into English very often. An example of this is huios, or brother. The next one is alpha upsilon, which makes the ow sound like in cow. One example in Greek is autos, meaning this in English. It transliterates to au. Epsilon upsilon makes the ow sound like alpha upsilon, but from New York. EU. For example, Eucharistos, or Eucharist in English. It transliterates to EU. Then we have eta upsilon, which is just like epsilon upsilon, but from New Jersey. AU. We can see this in words like eureka, or eureka in English. It transliterates to EU. Lastly, we have omicron upsilon, which makes the oo sound. An example of this is uranos, meaning sky. This later means heaven to the Christians as well. This transliterates to U. The last part of this slide is the iota subscript. It makes a diphthong, and contrary to what most people teach, the Attic pronunciation pronounces the iota as part of the diphthong. For example, alpha and iota together make the I sound, regardless of whether it's written as alpha iota or the iota subscript. Next, we have breathing marks. You may have noticed these little things over the top of vowels at the beginning of words, and these are breathing marks. Every word that starts with a vowel needs to have a breathing mark. The one consonant that gets a breathing mark is rho, which always has a rough breathing mark. But Octo, what
What's a rough breathing mark?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Reggie. So there's actually two types of breathing marks. There's a rough breathing mark and a soft breathing mark. Rough breathing marks are aspirated. That's why they make the H sound, like and soft breathing marks are not aspirated, and they make the sound. They don't make any sound. When there's a diphthong, the breathing mark always goes on the second letter, such as in hi, the ancient Greek article meaning the. But there is one exception. When there's a proper noun, the accent goes on the first letter, such as in Hyades or Hades, the god of the underworld. Now it's time for accents, the other thing that goes on top of ancient Greek vowels. So accents are really important and they have very individualized meanings, but that would be its whole own lesson, so we're not going to cover it. For now, let's just know that they exist, memorize where they are on words, and learn how to pronounce them. And just like with accent marks, there's different types. So there's an acute, grave, and circumflex. Now it's time to finally get to what they do. So the accents in Greek control the pitch. And pitch is when your voice gets higher or lower depending on what you're saying. So Greek uses tones to communicate. Greek is a tonal language. The first type of accent is the acute, and it looks like this, and it goes up in pitch like this. Oh. Then we have the grave, and the grave accent looks like this, and it points down, and it goes in pitch like this. Oh. Lastly, we have the circumflex. The circumflex looks like this, goes up and down in pitch like this. Oh. So memorizing each of the different Greek accents is actually pretty easy because they point how they're going. Acute points up, grave points down, and circumflex goes up and then down. Whoa. That was a lot. And if you got this far, you really deserve a little reward. So here's a fun little song to help you memorize the alphabet. Because truly learning ancient Greek, it should be spoken or sang. Ancient Greek was meant to be spoken, not written. Also, once you learn the song, you never forget it. Ever. And I promise you that there will be a point where you wish you could forget it. Anyways, here's the alphabet song. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon. Zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa. Lambda, mu, nu, t, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tau, upsilon, phi, psi, omega. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, be positive, be yourself. We'll see you in the next video. Peace.